Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Just wanted to remind you that the DSPN listener survey is currently happening. You have about a week or so left to get your name in to win a free hard copy of Tomb of Annihilation by filling out a 5-minute survey that is going to help us know what sort of shows and what kind of advertisements you want to hear on Don't Split the Podcast Network. Head on over to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com and click on the link in the top left that says listener survey. That's don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, and the link on the left says listener survey for a chance to win a free hard copy of Tomb of Annihilation and help out one of your favorite podcast networks. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am chatting with Blake Ryan and Lysa Chen about collaborative storytelling. These game designers are both powerhouses in their own right. You probably know Lysa Chen from being on this very network, the host of the Behold Her podcast. She's also an admin for the D&D Adventurers League. She's also one of the greatest humans in the world, as is Blake Ryan, who you likely know from his game Conjure Haggulus, and also from being a great supportive community member on Twitter. Both awesome, and Blake brought this topic up and said he wanted to talk about it, and I thought, this is great, let's get Lysa on board, and bada bing, bada boom, here we are talking about collaborative storytelling.
Okay, everybody, now I am here with two of my favorite people, and we are going to talk about collaborative storytelling. But before we do, let's go around the table and let people know who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games. Lysa, let's start with you.
My name is Lysa Chen. I am a D&D freelance writer. I've done work for the Adventurers League and Wizards of the Coast. I am also the associate community manager for the D&D Adventurers League, the official play campaign. Oh my goodness. I'm one of the Dungeon Masters Guild Adepts. And I also produce and host a podcast about women in tabletop gaming called Behold Her Podcast, hosted by this lovely network.
That's right, yes. I do many, many things in the world of role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons, a genius designer, and a genius person all around. So it's great to have you here, Lysa. We also have with us, for the first time on Tabletop Babble, I'm very excited about this, Blake Ryan. Blake, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Yeah, hi, I'm Blake Ryan. I'm way over here in Australia. I've recently released Conjure Haggulus role-playing game. And I've been, playing since 89, running since 92. I feel like the old man in the room.
It is awesome to have you here, Blake. You and I have been communicating on Twitter and things for a long time, and it feels like the Australians are starting to take over this industry a little bit. At least, are you feeling that? Like your MT Blacks, your Merrick Blackmans, your Blake Ryans are all coming for us, I feel like.
Yeah, I didn't even know MT was in Australia, too.
Yes.
The Menzo Baranzin of the world.
Yeah, we've got our spiders, we're coming for you.
Well, that's awesome. So when I knew I wanted to do a podcast with Blake, we sort of kicked around a couple topics, and Blake, you had thrown out collaborative storytelling, which I think is great and is like the number one thing for me that makes RPGs so awesome to play. So as we sort of kick off the conversation here, I want to ask both of you, what do you think collaborative storytelling in role-playing games means? Because I think sometimes we have this idea that, it's the GM story, right? It's like Critical Role I see referred to as Matt Mercer's story all the time. What do you think it means when we say a collaborative story is being shared with everybody at the table? And Blake, since you brought this topic, why don't you start?
I've been running games for a while now, so the first thing that comes to mind is that every campaign that's sort of tanked has been because we're not on the same page. You got some people that want to have lots of interaction with NPCs and family development and role-playing conversations in between quests, and others that just want to kill orcs and they don't want to talk to NPCs at all. And because you didn't have that sort of session zero chat about what we're doing, you weren't cooperating. You were kind of telling different stories. And so you got to think of it as not the GM written down a page and everyone's reading it. It's like, no, you all put your paragraphs on the page, agree to it, and then move forward. And also, if a player leaves, a new player rocks up, you've got to get them to read the page so that they're coming in with the same expectations and same sort of goal you're moving towards.
I think that's great, right? When you come in to a collaborative storytelling game, it's great to know where you want the story to go and what sort of story you want to tell before you jump right in. Lysa, how about you? What does collaborative storytelling mean to you? As someone who is big in the world of organized play, I'm really interested to hear this because I think one of the main complaints, often from people who have never actually played an organized play game, is that there's not enough freedom. You can't do whatever you want in organized play, yada, yada. So what does collaborative storytelling mean to you?
I do have a lot of experience in official play, but was introduced to D&D through homebrews. And I'd say, just for me, collaborative storytelling is 100% what tabletop role-playing games are about. Whether you're doing official play or you're making up a story completely from scratch with your DM. To me, it's even in official play, the situation is spelled out for you. And it might be that the end conclusion or where you're going next might be set in stone as well. But how you get there is completely up to the players, how you react and all the moments that you remember, like the silly, crazy, a million step plan that went off without a hitch, right? Those are the things I feel like you remember. And I feel like that is the story that folks are really telling.
Totally. And I could not agree with you more that sort of no matter where you're playing, be it organized play, be it a home game, be it at a weird convention, I don't know why it has to be a weird convention, could be any convention, right? That counts as organized play. You can really get into a collaborative story. I think I've had some of my craziest, weirdest, and most sort of in the zone with everybody else at the table moments during an organized play game, usually because we're strangers and it's we may never see each other again. Let's make the most of this, So I think there's lots and lots of fun to be had. And, we've all sort of said it in different ways that this is what the core of tabletop role-playing games is for a lot of people, is this collaborative play. So my first question is, if you are a dungeon master or a game master and you're running a game, how do we encourage collaborative play? One of the things that I found was when I first started out, I did what a lot of DMs do and sort of, dragged players through the story I wanted to tell, kept them on rails. And then when I went back to that same group and I was like, hey, listen, I want to try a different way of doing things. I've been doing it wrong. It was almost like they didn't know because I had broken them. I was so mad with myself because I had done that to the group and they didn't understand. They was like, so where do we go now? What do we do now? And I was like, oh no, that's up to you. I need you to drive the story, but it was my fault. So how do we as DMs, maybe some of us who have previously made bad choices, how can we encourage collaborative storytelling, especially if we have players who aren't used to that style or who are maybe shy or who are just starting out? How do we get the collaboration going with them? And Lysa, why don't you take this one first?
Well, I'd say that something that is actually a tip I got from someone recently, chatting with them about the Adventurers League for a community spotlight article, and I think they got it from somebody else, was making sure when you start a session that you set the tone for there to be more storytelling and role-playing than simply maybe going through and listing what your features are. It's sort of opening up a session like a movie. So when I run my game Ruins of Isari, I sort of actually explicitly tell people, let's all imagine this is a movie for a second. And it opens up and the camera is swooping across the jungle peninsula and you see this and you see this. And then all of a sudden it ducks into the jungle foliage. And then I'll ask who would be leading point and what weapon they use. And then I'll describe that the scimitar slashes through the greens and the camera pans to each of your characters. What would they be doing in this introductory movie moment? And I love that tip so much because I feel like it really gets people in the mood to be thinking in more of a storytelling, descriptive way, and it sets the tone for the entire session.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think there are a lot of role playing games too that use that model of like, hey, you're in a movie. We're going to introduce ourselves as whatever you were doing on your last quest or mission before this started, right? Blake, same question to you. What do you think are some good ways to get players ready to tell a story collaboratively with you as the game master?
Definitely give examples. So, like, if you say, oh, okay, you've camped for the night, what are you doing? And they look at you blankly, you can say, you can check your weapons, you can write a journal to your parents, you can stay on guard because, you're pretty sure those orcs aren't too far behind you, and you just chuck, 3 to 5 examples at them. And then they go, oh, okay. So then after a while, they've gotten to the habit of it, or they'll go, nah, I don't want to do that. I'm going to, whittle a sculpture of one of the other players, get them into the habit of it, and then you won't have to give examples as much. Well, tying in on what Lysa said is there's so many movies and TV series now we can point to and say, when the Avengers finished the fight, or when the Lord of the Rings party finished the fight, they didn't just all go to bed. Some of them had a chat. Some of them checked their weapons. Some of them looked for danger. Some of them discussed their mission. What do you want to do? You've got heaps of media examples to go, hey, what sort of character you are, and point them towards that so they can get into the headspace of the character.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to get involved, is to find those in between moments and let people know, like, hey, this is part of the story too. Just because you're not kicking a goblin down into a pit doesn't mean there's not something fun and interesting going on right now. And one way that I have seen other GMs get into it is the famous Mike Shea of Sly Flourish. When you're playing with him to keep track of monsters, instead of writing down 1, 2, or 3, he'll ask players, what's unique about this monster? What makes this gnoll different than the 6 other gnolls? And people will say, oh, he's really nasty. He's dripping, foaming at the mouth, or she's missing an eye, or whatever it is. And then Mike writes that down. And that's sort of a way to let people know, like, hey, this is your story, and I want you to be part of this too. What do you have to tell? So that sort of brings me to my next point. How do we as GMs, like, are you all comfortable with letting your players take some parts of the narrative that maybe they don't normally take, right? Normally we let the player have total agency over their one character and maybe, an animal companion or a familiar, that sort of thing. Do you ever ask players to take control of other parts of the story? Maybe some descriptive things. Hey, who's in this bar? You tell me. Or how do you know this person? You tell me, that sort of thing. Blake, do you ever do that?
All the time. It's actually written into most of the Powered by the Apocalypse games. I'll give you an example. You guys go to a new town, and I'll say, okay, so you go to the tavern. Lysa, why is the bartender annoyed at you? And James, what secret is in the cellar? And regardless of what you respond with, it may not be like James's character that knows about secret in the cellar, or maybe Lisa's character, but the player has got some spotlight without giving character favoritism. So the players have sort of co-written this story with their responses, and even if their character isn't involved, they're still invested because they created the thing. And, you don't have to do every NPC, every location, every room of the dungeon, but you just do it every now and then, and it's a cooperative and great way to get the players invested in the story.
It is, and it's also a great way for the players to tell you what sort of story they want to tell, right? It's a great way to sort of check in, like, oh, whenever I ask this guy about a secret, he's talking about undead. Or whenever I ask Lysa about what sort of people are in the bar, she's always talking about dinosaur people. So I guess she wants to tell a story about dinosaur people. I think that those are some good ways. When you give players the agency to steer, you get a better sense, and so does everybody else at the table, of like, oh, this is what this person likes, right? Lysa, I was very impressed because you did this with an adventure that you've wrote and have written many times. where you sort of let the players take control of the story, right? In Hisari is what I'm thinking about.
Oh, yeah. That's really funny that you said that question because I'm sitting here like, oh, these are such good ideas. I want to do this. But so in Ruins of Hisari, I have several places throughout where to move the story forward, characters have to tell a piece of their backstory, whether they have a backstory all planned out or they're improvising something on the spot. In Adventurers League, that's not something that you often get to talk about, especially in a convention setting. Maybe if you have a table you always play with. For me as the DM, that's been really, really cool because in AL, I don't often get to like completely improvise and impact people's characters the way you might in a homebrew setting. For example, in one part of Hisari, there's a room where you have to share what your character's deepest desire is. And so characters will tell me that, and then their desire is reflected in this orb. And so then I'll just take what they said and I'll describe what everyone in the room sees. For some people, it'll be something like, well, I want to know what my true origins are, or I'm looking for my long lost brother. And I get to make something up and describe just like a vague sort of scene. Maybe I put a dragon in it, so their origin seems really epic. And that is so rare in a convention setting. It's so cool seeing people get excited. They whip out their notebook and start scribbling notes as fast as they can. You get to be a little piece of someone's canon for their character. And maybe for people who get to do this all the time, that's a bit old hat. But that happened to me recently, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I understand why people really like homebrew games too.
Yeah, that is it is really awesome, and like I said, it's great to see people getting into it and discovering that. I think there are lots of systems that really encourage it to the point where they've probably been written by some clever GMs who hate to prep, and so it's like, well, you can't prep for this system because it's so collaborative. You have no idea what your players are going to do. I think by the Apocalypse games do that a lot. Right, Blake? Like, it's hard to prep for them, and any prep you do is more or less thrown out the window.
It's better to describe it that you're kind of choosing the colors on the paint palette, and then you hand it over to the players, and they're painting. So they're still using the colors you've put there, but, because you're not saying what sort of building is it. You're saying there's a tavern, and you're saying there's someone annoyed in there, and then you're saying why they're annoyed. You're still directing them, but it's a mutual thing, and it's not because you're lazy. It's just because if you've got 4 players, there's no way that ideas from 5 people is not going to be better than ideas from 1 people. It's just not going to happen. You're always going to get a bigger field because of all their experiences and what they like and what they've been exposed to. They're just the GM doing all the hard work and the players just going, okay, I'm going to follow the bouncing ball.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You need to give people enough to go on, and as the game master, it is still your job to show up, run the game, and the players are primarily concerned with their characters, and you're primarily concerned with everything else.
Don't go anywhere. There's more tabletop babble coming up.
At the center of the great forest, on an island in the sky, the Crow, Deer, and Wolf clans have been training 3 fearsome warriors from infancy for one purpose: to protect and serve the goddess of Estra.
So how exactly are we going to do that? Protecting the goddess, I mean.
Fran lies down.
Lyca can't answer because she's too busy sniffing both your butts.
Okay, back off, Wolf Clan.
This disturbs me, but not to worry, I will instantly repress it.
These are the guardians of the goddess. Lyca, the tiefling paladin who hails from the Wolf Clan.
Nobody's touching one beautiful hair on the goddess's head as long as I'm around.
Corbin, a human druid from the Crow Clan.
Human! I'm a crow!
And Fran, a water genasi wizard of the Deer Clan.
So, is there a way to quit this job or what?
This unlikely trio will venture forth into an unfamiliar world without knowing who can be trusted against the powerful dark force stalking the steps of their goddess and threatening the future of their world. Tune in every second Monday to Dames and Dragons, a 5th edition D&D actual play podcast. See ya then.
All right, back to the show.
Let's flip the script, right? How can we as players be the best players and the best collaborators we can be with our fellow GMs, but then also with our other players? What are some good habits we can get into when we're building a world with others? Lysa, why don't we start with you?
Well, two things come to mind. First, I know just for myself and trying to be a better player for me and my friends, I'm trying more and more to interact with the other players at the table as my character, because I feel like often it's all the players interacting individually with the DM, but it's such a richer experience when you're just interacting with your other table members, and the DM chimes in now and then to ask for roles or make rulings. The other thing that comes to mind is actually a game I played in recently for DSPN Presents, the Undermountain game. There was one scene where we got into a fight, and one of the characters points at the NPC who sort of stood out and calls her out as a nemesis. And the whole fight then became about this weird rivalry, and were they in a relationship? And all the other characters are like, well, this is between you two. And it was so much fun. And I found out after we stopped hitting the record button that player had just made that up on the spot. He's just like, I feel like this person being my nemesis. And that blew my mind. I was like, oh, you can do that? But you absolutely can do that. And this DM happened to be someone who loved that and got a kick out of that and really and just rolled with the punches. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to be surprised as a GM, especially when you're incorporating something that I've put into the world into your story like that. Like, hey, here's a villain. Oh, you just made this villain way more important than I thought it would be. That's really cool. That is rewarding for a GM. It's just as rewarding when the GM works in some of your backstory into the game. That same feeling we get as GMs when someone works a piece of the story into their backstory or into being important for their character in some way. And it also is helpful for other players at the table who realize, oh, I can do this too, right? You can have a sort of awakening in them about oh, this is acceptable at this table, so I'm gonna do that, and I'm also gonna have a nemesis, or somebody for me is going to be an NPC that we met earlier. I think that NPC is actually my dad, so
Yeah, I think that's a cool way to look at it, because I guess there might be some players who want to do something like that, but they're worried that they're going to annoy the GM, or make the GM feel like you're trying to do their job or something. But really, it's just showing that you're really engaged with this story that the GM is trying to help you build. And so it's probably, in most cases, going to make them feel awesome.
Absolutely. Blake, what about you? As far as being a player goes, how can we be good collaborators and contributors to the story?
The first thing that comes to mind is join in. Like with Lisa's example, another player could also say, wait, she's my ex-lover as well, or that nemesis was actually part of a guild and you fought with that guild before. So you're sort of adding on to the story you're not stealing their thunder, you're just adding more depth to it. Yeah, just being willing to go with things. If you don't like it, just offer an alternative. If the GM said, it turns out one of your cousins has turned into a vampire, and you're like, I've had enough of vampire stuff. Can we do something else? And the GM says, what? You say, well, this or this. Put an effort into giving the group something to work with instead of just going no and sitting back, because you're denying your own fun. You're stopping your own story.
Yeah. Have those conversations frank sometimes and between games, check in with your players, see how they're doing, see how your fellow players are feeling about it. And when your GM asks for feedback, be honest with them, right? They want to provide an experience that is fun for everybody. And if there's something for you that isn't fun, feel free to, provide that feedback. I try to get feedback from my groups after sessions about like, hey, what'd you guys think? Did you like this? Did you not? And we've been playing together long enough that they're very honest with me, and it is super helpful week to week because it helps me know not just what they like, but also like, oh, they weren't really into that. Like maybe I shouldn't try that again. And I had a really big thing planned for that I can sort of scrap because I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I won't make them do 6 sessions of dinosaur racing if they didn't really like dinosaur racing, which would be ridiculous. I would lose that group in a heartbeat. But, that sort of brings me to another thing is when we get into collaborative storytelling with players, we can find a lot of times players are sort of building on each other's stuff, right? They like you were saying, Blake, like somebody might decide that's my nemesis too, or hey, your nemesis is my brother, that sort of thing, which can lead down a sort of tangled path where we get player conflict. And in collaborative storytelling and sort of in general, I guess, what are some good ways to deal with player conflict, up front? Blake, I'll start with you. Are you someone who encourages player conflict? Do you like it? Do you not? And how do you handle it?
I can't say I like it or I encourage it, but it does happen. You're going to have that sort of evolve at the table sometimes when you've got different goals. But, if things start to get heated, you say, just say, look, I'm going to hit the pause button and, we'll take a break, whatever. You guys cool. You realize it's just your characters. Also, player characters, they're not just, murder hobos. They've got int stats. They've got families and friends and people that love them and that. Don't just kill someone because you want to fight over a magic sword that you've only just found, despite you being 30 years old or whatever. Just think about what you're doing, have a break, chill out, and, maybe even at the sort of meta level discuss ways you can evolve from this situation and then go, okay, we're cool, we're back in the character. All right, let's go.
The old talk about it like adults solution. I like it. How about you, Lysa? Do you ever deal with a lot of player conflict? Do you encourage it? What's your player conflict experience like, and how do you handle it when it comes up?
Yeah, I mean, like Blake, I am not shy to just hit the pause button, make sure everybody is cool with what's happening. And if they're not, just remind people, like, I mean, especially in Adventurers League, there's the code of conduct. PvP isn't really encouraged unless, for whatever reason, everyone's on board and having fun. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a game. If someone's not having fun at the table, then it's not necessarily worthwhile. So just making sure people are enjoying themselves. If someone's doing something that stops people from enjoying themselves, just let's pause the game, talk about it, and work things out.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. Like, this is a game at the end of the day. And, exactly like you said, Lysa, and like you said, Blake, like, better to talk about it. And the game is so much better when everyone around the table is invested in having fun, especially if you're going for that collaborative story. I think that is a huge way to go. So how far can we take collaborative storytelling? In the 4E D&D days, the Dungeon Master's Guide 2 had this whole thing about like how you could basically play a game without a GM if you needed to, and just for players saying like, okay, we're going to go here next, and we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and you'll run the monsters this time, and I'll run the monsters. Like, can we play role-playing games where, we don't have a GM at all, or where the give and take is so great that sort of the line between player and GM is blurred? There are certainly systems like that are out there already. Can we do that in our more traditional games where, like D&D, there's a dungeon master or game master who's running everything, and sort of everybody is contributing? What do you think, Blake?
I'd have to say no, not for sort of ongoing games. You need some sort of GM because at the start, you should agree on, a style or a tone of what you want. And if you don't sort of have any controls, you just every time ask for, the encounter details or the object details from the players, you're just going to go all over the place. There's no sticking within the bounds of that style or tone. And it's not sort of linked by story. It's just too random. So I think you can kind of get 25% GM, 75% player input, but not less than that, because otherwise, it's just too random, not linked, and it's like, it's not. an ongoing story, then it's just a random series of events.
Sure, yeah. I've often heard collaborative games likened to a television writer's room, right? Where you sort of have all these writers who are pitching ideas and building a story together, but there's always a head writer or an executive producer in that room who is guiding the overall vision of the story. And that's sort of what a GM does. It sounds like you're sort of espousing that method of playing, particularly for a longer game. You know, I think Fiasco, one of the reasons Fiasco works, it's one of those GM-less games, is because it's only one session, right? You know, it would be hard to have fiasco after fiasco happen to characters. So, Lysa, what do you think? As far as games like D&D go, do you think we'll ever approach a time, or are there circumstances where you might have sort of a GM-less game?
Yeah, I feel like I'm really curious about it now, and I'd love to give a game like that a shot. My first thought is like, as you mentioned with Fiascos, like, maybe something like that could work for a one shot. But I feel like for me as a player, part of the fun is feeling like I mean, I know the world's not real, but like, if you're completely everyone's making stuff up, the world is sort of being created as you play, and there's a nice part of the world feeling like it exists, and you're actually discovering things, and you're unraveling a mystery and trying to figure things out. I mean, I really like mystery games that I just feel like you don't get if everyone's just kind of improvising the world as you go. It's just not the same, that sense of discovery.
Yeah, who gets to be the authority on things like the mystery and that sort of thing. You know, certainly you could take turns, but then isn't that just a rotating GM that you have among your group? Yeah, I think you're right. There are definitely some things, some styles of play that are really suited to having a game master there. And that's not to say you still can't tell, or that you can't tell a collaborative story in that style. It's just good to have someone guiding the vision. It's good to have someone who has the answer to the mysteries going, and that sort of thing.
I think you could do it as like a one-off, like a Christmas episode or a shared dream prophecy of things that are going to happen, and you can all kind of take turns chucking some things in, but that's a one-off in a sort of ongoing campaign, not a regular thing.
Yeah. You know, there is a variant in the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition that I've always wanted to try, and I have not. Maybe we should make this a DSPN Presents, where you start play and every single player has a token, and at any point during the game they can cash in their token and they become the DM, and that's how it works. And then whoever is the DM steps back and takes control of a character. So it's all this crazy like jumping up and down, and but everybody only gets a shot at DMing once. So it's not too crazy. It's not like go up, sit down, go up, sit down. I think that would be an interesting thing to do once. I think that would be chaotic and a headache to do every week.
When you do that, can I request Vegas be on? Because that'll be awesome.
I think I would just let Vegas run the game, probably, because he's so good at running games. Yeah, I'm trying to think who I almost want to watch that. So I know I would put Lysa in that game for sure.
I'm just sitting here. I'm thinking like, what would not like a rotating GM, but a true no GM game feel like? And it reminds me of like being a kid and just playing make believe. And it's not like there's a GM to your make believe.
Sure,
but it's still fun. So I don't know. I would totally give that a shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it would be an interesting thing to try. Although I do think you would either need to have a group of people who are very like all on the same wavelength, and gonna tell a great story together. And I think it would preclude some styles of storytelling, right? Like you said, Lysa, mystery and that sort of thing. But it would be an interesting experiment. And I'm sure there are people out there who have done it. So if you have done it, get in touch with us. Let us know how your GM-less game of D&D or whatever system normally has a GM that you played without one went, because we'd love to hear about it. So as we're sort of winding down here, I want to talk a little bit about collaborative style. If there are people out there who want to make their games more collaborative, but they don't know how to start. I think one of the things that's really hard in D&D, particularly if you've been playing sort of like a tyrant GM, as I did for many years, is letting go, like letting go and like, oh, but if I come to the session and I'm not prepared, I'm not going to know what to do. And, what if we're boring? What if we just sit there and look at each other? That's not fun. So how can we as GMs get more collaborative? What can we do to be comfortable with collaboration? And Blake, I'll start with you.
Just ease into it. You can do whatever, homebrew or published module you want. And maybe, Lysa goes over to join in the gambling and the table in the tavern. And I'll say, James, describe the guy, dealing out the cards. And that's it. That's your only question for the entire session. And later on the session, I'll ask Lysa to describe a room in the dungeon, what makes it different to the rest of the dungeon, what makes it the same. And that's it. Just one question each per session. And then a couple of sessions later, maybe 2 questions each sort of thing, just get them used to, I can contribute, I can make stuff up.
Yeah, absolutely. Conjure Hagalaz has that sort of balance, right? I know that's one of the things you were talking about is you wanted to create a game where there was a balance between sort of collaboration and GM control. Is that a game you'd recommend for people who want to get comfortable with collaborative storytelling?
Definitely. It's definitely designed as an on-ramp, either coming from traditional or going to sort of more narrative. And yeah, you can just, and there's examples in the books, but there's also plenty of, PBTA stuff on YouTube just to have a look and just, you can ease into it. You don't have to go bang, all right, I'm going to ask players for everything. It's like, no, that's not fair on them. And it's not guided. You need to find a bit of a balance and just ease into it. That's all.
Lysa, what about you? You play with people of various skill levels. You go all around the country playing at different conventions and stuff. How do you suggest GMs become more comfortable with collaborative storytelling?
I love and I'm 100% going to steal these tips about just asking characters to describe the scene or the features of the different monsters. Your tip from Sly Flourish. That sounds really fun. And I can feel like everyone wants to target like the knoll without one eye or something like that. But I'd say like 2 little tips that come to mind are I am constantly just saying, so what do you guys do? Like just describing a scenario and then leaving it like really open-ended for people to jump in. Or if I notice there's always the same players jumping in, making a point to ask someone who's a little bit more quiet, well, what is your character doing while this is happening? And then the other little way that you can sort of ease into things is when someone gets the kill shot, asking them to describe that. I feel like a lot of people are very comfortable with the combat aspect of role playing. So that's a way to sort of ease them into at least describing something that they're comfortable with. And everyone loves describing like a head exploding or something like that. So it's a fun way to get some chuckles.
It's so true. And one of my favorite things to do is actually like, I love to do the describe your killing blow thing. And then sometimes maybe someone who got killed comes back as an undead with that wound, right?
Oh, that's so good.
And it's like, oh, look at the impact you had on the world. You shot this guy through the neck and now he comes back and he's got half an arrow through his neck and that kind of thing. There's fun ways you can do that. And I'm totally with you. I think when you get into the mechanics, right? If somebody is telling you they make a search check or they make an arcana check to see what they know, I like to ask like, okay, how are you searching? Tell me, right? Because it's not going to affect the outcome of the mechanics of what's happening, right? But it does get them more into the mindset. Or how do you know that this arcane seal leads to the abyss? What is it? What did you read? And they can provide, in their backstory, they had a tutor who now is lost in the abyss. And all of a sudden their story's just gotten so much richer, right? Those are the kinds of things, if you can turn more mechanics into story, that will help you start to get there for sure. This has been a super awesome chat. Thank you both for hopping on here with me to talk about collaborative collaborative stories. Lysa, where can people find you?
People can find me primarily in two ways. I have a website, lysachen.com, Lysa spelled with a Y. But I'm also very active on Twitter at MercifulDM, Merciful also spelled with a Y.
Excellent. And Blake, where can people find you?
Twitter's the best one. Just Blake Ryan Batman on Twitter. I'm always there. Twitter's the best.
You've blown your cover identity as Black Batman. And where can people check out Conjure Hagglas?
Just on drive-through, you can put in Conjure Hagglas or Blake Ryan. It'll come up.
Would you say Hagglas? Hagglas?
Hagglas. Yeah, with a Z, but it'll come up.
Gotcha. We call them Z's here in America. I don't know why. Z is so much cooler. Well, thank you all so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble today.
People, that was a great conversation, and if you agree with me, I would appreciate it if you would head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Even if you do not have iTunes, odds are the podcatcher app you listen to uses the iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts to other listeners. So go create a free account, rate us, and rate all of the other great podcasts you listen to. If you leave us a 5-star review, I will read it out loud verbatim and credit the person who left it, like Marshalls James, who left a review entitled Good Information, Fun Times. It reads, "This podcast is great if you're looking for inside information from the people who create our favorite campaigns, races, and monsters. With an informed host and a great variety of guests, you will learn something new every episode. Go ahead and subscribe. You won't regret it. Hey, Kristen, hopefully your Triton is still alive when you hear this. Oh, and listen to Therapy by Kristen on Spotify." Woo! A plug! Thank you so much, Marshall James, for leaving this review and listening to the show. And thank you as well to Kristen. I do hope that your Triton is alive. And I'm going to check out your song on Spotify. That's pretty awesome. Maybe, I don't know, does Kristen need like a last name for this plug? I'm sure there's more than one song called Therapy on Spotify, but we will see. We will persevere and we will check it out. All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and be sure to follow my blog, worldbuilderblog.com, to get a lot of updates about some fun game design stuff that I have to announce that I'm sure we'll also be talking about on this podcast, but it's going to break there first. So check it out over at worldbuilderblog.com. Coming soon this summer. I'm so excited I can finally talk about some of this stuff. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. Make sure you're following all of the Twitch terms and conditions before you stream it.
Oh, hello, adventurer. I didn't see you come in. I've heard that you've been asking about Sir Vance and the elf wizard Lorik Darkbolt. Well, I can tell you everything you need to know. It's not an easy tale to tell, that of the make-believe heroes. I suppose I could tell you all about it, but instead, why don't I show you?
Lorik Darkbolt, that's me. Sir Vance Oftwall.
My vision came to me, and I was standing in a grove in the deepest heart of an enormous forest.
Palor himself said stuff to me. I'm chosen to go and find this golden tree that shines light everywhere. There's this grove in this
Lord, I'm gonna have to ask you to calm down.
Around for the bar.
You guys are barreling toward the village.
You can call me Jimalil.
His name is Jim.
What's up, fellas? I heard something about adventure. Yeah, my name is Kellen Dimble.
We need to go faster! And he points his wand straight up in the air.
He rolled a natural 20.
Oh. Charlie!
Accept the sanction, Lorik, and find the elf, the Darkbolt, and bring him to me. Go now to your favorite podcatcher to download and subscribe to Make Believe Heroes, an actual play 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons adventure. For more information, follow us on Twitter at MBH Podcast. Happy adventuring.